decisively assented to the belief that human nature is distorted by a pervasive radical evil. 5. In reaction against the Enlightenment, the Romantic movement identified the heart of religion with feeling rather than with the conclusions of intellectual arguments. Augustine was not in the least anti-intellectual, but he did not think that intellect had the last word, and he pioneered a highly positive evaluation of human feelings. We owe to him our use of the word heart in this sense. 6. He was the most acute of Christian Platonists and did much to lay the foundations for the synthesis between Christianity and classical theism stemming from Plato and Aristotle. Plotinus in the 3rd century A.D. deeply influenced him by his systematization of the Platonic tradition, but Augustine also became one of the most penetrating of all critics of this philosophical tradition, to which he himself owed so much. 7. He saw more clearly than anyone before him, or for a long time after him, that issues of supreme importance are raised by the problem of the relation of words to the reality they attempt to describe. He was a pioneer in the critical study of nonverbal communication. Anselm, Aquinas, Petrarch, never without a pocket copy of the Confessions, Luther, Bellarmine, Pascal, and Kierkegaard all stand in the shade of his broad oak. His writings were among the favorite books of Wittgenstein. He was the bête noire of Nietzsche. His psychological analysis anticipated parts of Freud. He first explored the existence of the subconscious. He was the first modern man, in the sense that with him the reader feels himself addressed at a level of extraordinary psychological depth, and confronted by a coherent system of thought, large parts of which still make potent claims to attention and respect. He affected the way in which the West has subsequently thought about the nature of man, and what we mean by the word God. Although as a follower of Plato he was little concerned with the natural physical environment, and wrote with fear of scientific investigations conducted without reverence and in indifference to ethical considerations, yet the modern scientist's assumption that mathematical order and rationality are the supreme features of the world had no more eloquent advocate in antiquity than he. He therefore contributed something substantial to the attitude towards the created order that would make the emergence of modern science possible. On the other hand, he cannot be fairly read if he is treated as other than what he was, a man of the ancient world, whose mind and culture were altogether shaped by the literature and philosophy of Greece and Rome, and whose conversion to Christianity set him in some degree at odds with the classical past. In relation to that past, he stood as both critic and transmitter to the medieval and modern worlds. Just as the Greeks assumed, with some reason, that no one had written poetry to surpass Homer, or history in a way that rivaled Herodotus and Thucydides, or philosophy which was not a series of footnotes to Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, and Epicurus, so also the Romans attributed the status of a classical model to their own past masters, Cicero for prose and oratory, Virgil and Horace for poetry. In Augustine's time, there were educated people who knew entire orations of Cicero and the whole of Virgil by heart. Because the invention of printing has made books relatively inexpensive compared with manuscripts, such feats of memory appear needless and almost incredible to us today. But in the ancient and medieval worlds, much school education consisted of learning by rote at an impressionable age. Cicero's prose and Virgil's poetry were so profoundly stamped on Augustine's mind that he could seldom write many pages without some reminiscence or verbal allusion. In youth he also read with deep admiration Sallust's somber histories of the Roman Republic and the comedies of Terence. These too were part of the literary air he naturally breathed, and into his prose he would frequently work some turn of phrase taken from classical Latin literature. Many such allusions have been identified only comparatively recently, and it is certain that there are more yet to be located. Augustine was not unique in his age in possessing this high literary culture. His cultural background was that of Roman Africa, rich colonial provinces which had long enjoyed peace and prosperity, with highly educated people who adorned their villas with noble mosaic and sculpture, such as one can see in the Bardo Museum at Tunis. Since the Muslim conquest of the region more than 200 years after Augustine's death, the north and south sides of the Mediterranean have belonged to separate cultural, if not commercial worlds, and have spoken different languages, except during the relatively brief period of